the invitation, and it's great to be here, and great to, I think JF Books is such an asset to the community, so thank you for hosting this event, and I've attended many events here before, and so great to be speaking here today. So I'm going to be talking about a photo project documenting the expansive movie industry in China, which resulted in this book, and I think there are copies back there. So the photo book, Once Upon a Time in Shanghai, is published by Daylight Books. So it's primarily a photo book, photographs of many film production sites around the country, but also contains an essay by Michael Berry, who's a China scholar at UCLA, and sort of notes and information about the various locations. Anyway, one of the questions I get is, sort of how I got onto this topic of photographing movie sets. So I'd done actually a previous photo book called Once Upon a Time in Almeria, which was focused on the legacy of Hollywood in south of Spain. In the 60s and 70s in south of Spain, there were a lot of Hollywood films being made there, and also the Italians filmed many spaghetti westerns, so I visited a lot of those. So anyway, this was from the previous book in Spain, and I just wanted to mention that because I sort of got fascinated by these movie ghost towns. I have a personal connection to this region of southern Spain. My family is from Almeria, so that was sort of how I first got onto this topic before going to China. So about 10 years ago, I was in Beijing on a fellowship, and I thought it'd be interesting. I heard that there was this enormous film studio complex outside Beijing in Huairou in the suburbs. And they were making films there. Actually, there were Hollywood productions being made there at the time. And so I wanted to go check this out. I was particularly fascinated by the scale of the industry there. There are entire towns constructed around filmmaking in China. And this map here just shows the locations that are represented in the book. So there's sort of around various places around the country, about a dozen sites represented. This is, of course, not all the film production sites, but just a selection of them. So again, it's not just Shanghai. The title Shanghai comes from just sort of references the fact that the origins of the movie industry in China really started in Shanghai. But these sites are spread out around the country. The photographs focus specifically on these big outdoor film sets that are constructed and the life around them. So local governments often provide financing for these movie towns in hopes of attracting business. And the scale is really unparalleled. So this is, just to give you a sense of the scale, this is a full-scale replica of the Forbidden City, which was constructed in Hengdian. This is not just a plywood facade, but they've literally reconstructed the entire Forbidden City. So many of these film sets are really entire fortresses, urban neighborhoods, towns that have been reconstructed just for film production. It really has more in common with Cecil B. DeMille's City of the Pharaoh of a century ago, rather than today's kind of digital production facilities. So you don't see stuff like this in Hollywood anymore these days. 10 years ago, when I was starting to sort of research this project, the movie industry in China was gaining worldwide attention. As this Forbes headline says, this was exactly 10 years ago, China's movie industry is growing faster than any other countries anywhere, anytime, ever. And so at the time, we were seeing new movie theaters being constructed at an incredible rate. China was selling more movie tickets than any other country. Thousands of films and TV episodes were being produced, more than in Hollywood. And China was poised to take over as the world's largest motion picture market, overtaking the U.S. This prediction was before the COVID pandemic, so that has kind of, that saw theaters close, production stop, and so that's changed the trajectory a little bit, but China still remains close second in terms of being the largest film market in the world. However, the growing size of the Chinese market began to raise alarm about the influence it might have on Hollywood. And this has been a theme we've seen over and over again over the recent years. Hollywood studios were entering into co-production deals in China, bringing over Hollywood stars to China to make films. Some films added elements designed specifically to appeal to a Chinese audience, to be able to be more marketable in China. So one example is The Martian with Matt Damon, who, I don't know if you've seen the film, you may remember that it was this advanced Chinese rocket technology that actually saved the day in the film. There was also a cameo by Chinese star Fan Bingbing, who appears in the film. So these were clearly made to appeal to a Chinese audience. And of course, Hollywood films are subject to state censorship in China. But there was concern not just that Hollywood films would be censored in China, when they're shown in China, but that Hollywood would actually alter the contents of its films from the start in order to appeal to a Chinese audience and also meet the demands of the Chinese government. Some of you may have seen there's a Wall Street Journal reporter, Eric Schwartzel, his book Red Carpet, which documents how the Chinese government has used its market power to influence Hollywood films and suppressing elements that might be seen as negative towards the country. So that's kind of just wanted to set the scene a little bit. The other point to make here is that this massive industry did not appear overnight. So it's really been kind of expanding over the past 4 decades. And this expansion has coincided with the construction of these film sites, cities around the country that I photographed. So I'm going to tell the story of a few of these big studios and show some pictures as well. So another sort of piece of background is just to understand the development of the film industry in China. So after the Cultural Revolution, the Beijing Film School reopened. The first graduating class graduated in 1982. That graduating class included a number of future filmmakers who are now well known. Zhang Yimou and Chen Kaige were both in that class, are now famous directors. So this is a flyer from Yellow Earth, made in 1984. The films that these 5th generation directors were making at the time were, they were focused on making films in a more naturalistic style, not the big blockbuster films you see today. They were shooting on location. They often had a very limited budget to work with, but their films began to gain international recognition and win awards at film festivals. Yellow Earth is a good example. The film actually has relatively limited dialogue, and it has lots of these long shots of desolate landscape in Shanghai province, framing these small figures, and it's kind of a slow-moving film using real locations. But the structure of film production in China underwent major changes in the 1990s. So these changes shifted the industry away from the art films of the 80s towards greater commercialization. And so the economic transformation that we saw in China in the 1990s also led to the breakup of the state monopoly on film distribution. It allowed increased quotas for Hollywood films to come into the country, and Hollywood films then began to dominate the box office. Titanic in 1997 set box office records for China at the time. And also private companies were allowed to invest now in film production, including foreign investment. And so this all led to greater commercialization of the film industry. It started to look a little bit more like Hollywood. The Hollywood films that were coming into the country were now starting to dominate Chinese theaters. And so in order for domestic films to be able to compete with Hollywood, there were a couple of things that needed to happen. First of all, there needed to be greater financing to support large budget productions. And also, there was an emphasis on making films that could be marketable on a broad scale. So as the 5th generation directors gained international success, they also gained access to more resources, including foreign investment. And this outside financing is really what allowed for the construction of these big outdoor sets that, that I photographed. And so many of the sites that I photographed were really initially developed during this period in the 1990s. As a first example, Hengdian World Studios, which is where the reproduction of the Forbidden City is. Got its start really in the 1990s when there was this film, The Opium War, was being produced with massive state backing. I think it had a $15 million budget, which was by far the most expensive Chinese film ever made at the time. So they wanted to recreate the 19th century streets and port of Guangzhou and Hong Kong at the time, and they were under pressure to finish the film quickly because they had a planned nationwide release that would coincide with the 1997 handover of Hong Kong back to China. So there was a local farmer turned entrepreneur, Xu Wenrong was his name, who offered to use agricultural land in this around this village of Hengdian, which was at the time was just a small village, to build these enormous studio sets. And so he hired hundreds of workers. They constructed about 100 Qing-era houses at the time and an imitation port and other buildings over a period of about 3 months. So it was quite an undertaking. So here's a couple of slides of what that section of Hengdian looks like. It's still being used on an almost daily basis. There's something filming there, either a movie or a TV series. This was from a production that was being made there at the time. And these are all images from the book, just to give you a flavor of what it looks like. And these sites are also used now, popular for wedding and engagement shoots. Here you can see 2 wedding shoots going on at the same time. They're almost on top of each other. So after the Opium Wars film, Xu Wenrong continued to expand. He had this grand vision of making Hengdian like a Chinese Hollywood. And the sets would be free for film crews to use, but the revenue would be generated from hotels, restaurants, and equipment rental. And so Hengdian has now grown into this sprawling complex that actually encompasses several different film villages. This is these are images from this Qin Imperial Palace, which was constructed for the film The Emperor and the Assassin, made in 1998, also director Chen Kaige. And was also a very high-budget film, was later used in Zhang Yimou's film Hero. Other films have been made there over the years. There was an action film called Dragon Blade with Jackie Chan, John Cusack, and Adrian Brody. Not as critically acclaimed as some of the other films, but it was memorable. And of course, the Forbidden City set that I mentioned, which is most famous as the site for filming the series Story of Yangshi Palace, which at the time was one of the most popular TV shows of all time. So Hengdian now actually brings in more revenue from tourism than from film productions, because the other draw is now these sites draw tourists who want to see where their favorite films and TV episodes were made. Hengdian was drawing over 12 million tourists a year before COVID. I don't know if they've completely recovered from that now, but certainly it's still a major tourist draw. And it does seem odd to see these throngs of tourists traveling to see this fake Forbidden City when you can go see the real thing in Beijing. But people do travel here just to have that experience. And you can have your photo taken in period costume as well. That's popular. Hengdian World Studios is now a big business. This is a section of the Shanghai Bund that they were constructing when I was there. I'm sure it's finished by now. So this is another site. This is the Shanghai Film Park. So this is outside Shanghai. There's also a large studio facility there, which is literally several city blocks of what Shanghai looked like in the 1930s and the early 20th century. So this area got its start after the success of Farewell My Concubine, which was a critically acclaimed film, again by director Chen Kaige, who was working with a former Taiwanese film star turned producer Feng Su and her company Thompson Films. They had produced Farewell My Concubine. Given its success, she told him that for his next film, for Chen's next film, money was no object. How can you put a price on art, she said. So he was basically given an unlimited budget. His next film, Temptress Moon, which starred Gong Li and Leslie Chung, who had also been in Farewell. The story traces their history as childhood playmates who then grow up in the 1930s and get involved with crime and opium addiction. The challenge was how to shoot these street scenes of Shanghai in the 1930s. Nanjing Road, Shanghai's main shopping street, of course, today looks nothing like it did in the 1930s. It's very modern. And so the producers agreed to build at the Shanghai studio film lot Nanjing Road as it looked in the 1930s. So they built several blocks of the film, and this has been used over and over again, this section of street. You can see the Sincere Company. So this Sincere Company department store, there was actually the first Chinese-owned department store, originally opened in 1917 on Nanjing Road. And if you've seen any Chinese TV series and movies set in early 20th century Shanghai, I can almost guarantee you it's going to show that intersection with the Sincere Company department store. And these sets have then been able to be reused through multiple films and TV series. The Japanese occupation is another theme that we see coming throughout the films that are set in that time. Here's some gangsters on lunch break. And again, it's very popular to do wedding shoots and engagement shoots, sometimes in period costume. So I think we have a video here. I was just going to show to give you a sense of how this particular street has been reused over the years. This is from Temptress Moon. You see the tram car. Shanghai Grand, which was another gangster film with Leslie Chung and Andy Lau. This is The White Countess, which was a Merchant Ivory film with Ralph Fiennes and Natasha Richardson, who crossed paths in Shanghai just before the Japanese occupation. This is The Painted Veil, Edward Norton and Naomi Watts. Most of this film actually is set in rural China, but oddly enough here, the Shanghai set is used to represent the streets of London. So you see English language signs in the flower shop. And then there was Ang Lee's Lust Caution, which actually built, there was a whole other section of the streets that was built for that film too, so that greatly expanded this set. And the tram car, of course, appears over and over again. This is the Hollywood version from The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. So this was a state-sponsored historical epic. Here after the liberation of Shanghai, Sun Yat-sen's widow goes out and sees all the soldiers sleeping in the city. So this is from the Bruce Willis film Looper, which this is supposed to be Shanghai in the future. Once Upon a Time in Shanghai, which is a martial arts film set in period Shanghai. This is from the end of the film where the main character turns himself into the police in the end. And this is actually a product commercial made by Chinese video artist Yang Fudong. So I think that gives you a flavor of how these sets can be reused over and over again in multiple films. And you know, if you get the chance now to see a film or TV episode set here, look out for that. You know, the Sincere Company building, and I think you'll recognize the spot. So I just wanted to say, actually, before we go on, just something, you know, to build on this idea of why this enormous scale of construction. Why do we see this being done in Hollywood? In China and not in Hollywood or elsewhere? So many of these large-scale sets reflect specific periods in episodes in China's history, and so we see many movies and dramas being set in in similar historical settings. So there are the costume dramas of the Qing Dynasty, the 19th century Opium Wars, gangsters in 1930s Shanghai, resistance under the Japanese occupation. These are kind of themes we see over and over again. And so filmmakers are actually able to reuse these locations over and over again. So there's kind of economy of scale to building these huge film sets that can be reused over and over again. You know, there are probably dozens of TV shows at any time that are streaming that are set in the Forbidden City. And these historical settings are so prominent in large part because censorship rules in China limit the scope of acceptable themes. So state regulations prohibit certain types of themes and content, and it's often easier to tell a story in a historical setting without getting into trouble, you know, around current political issues. So many shows, for example, focus on military confrontations with in the Japanese occupation. So there was an article in the South China Morning Post a while ago interviewing a young actor at Hengdian World Studios. His primary role was to play a Japanese soldier who gets killed. And he said he'd sometimes die up to 8 times a day. His dream was one day to play a soldier of the 8th Route Army on the other side, so he wouldn't have to die every day, I guess. So just to highlight a couple other of my sort of favorite locations here. This is the Western Film City in Ningxia Province in Inchuan. This is sort of on the edge of the Gobi Desert and has been used in a number of sort of epic historical films. This site was first promoted as a film location by the 1982 film The Herdsman, which was based on a story by Zhang Xianling, and was the first sort of feature film made here. Zhang Yimou's Red Sorghum, Wong Kar-wai's Ashes of Time also use this site, this kind of desert location. It's been used to recreate epic battles of the Warring States period and to make Mad Max-style adventure films. I'm not sure what that dragon skeleton is left over from, but it was some fantasy adventure film. And then the China Film Group lot outside Beijing. This was, again, the first site that I had visited that I mentioned earlier. So the China Film Group Corporation is the largest state-owned film production and distribution company in China. It's had a hand in a lot of big productions, including Hollywood co-productions, The Great Wall with Matt Damon, Man of Tai Chi with Keanu Reeves were filmed in part there. And the production base in a kind of far suburb of Beijing includes also state-of-the-art digital production facilities, 16 sound stages, equipment and prop warehouses, and then some big outdoor lots too where they can construct sets. And it's really taken over the whole town basically. So here this is inside one of the sound stages there. Here's some extras on break looking at their phones in period costume. And this was actually from an African streetscape. There's actually a whole sort of African streetscape that was added there for the film Wolf Warrior 2, which if you've seen it, there's a former elite special ops soldier who saves a group of Chinese nationals who are caught up in a rebel attack in some unnamed North African country. The set has been then reused for other films, including probably the less acclaimed China Salesman, which starred Mike Tyson and Steven Seagal, which also had a kind of China-Africa theme to it. And so I don't know if folks have seen the film The 800. This came out a few years ago. So this was a big, blockbuster, really kind of Hollywood-style production, made by Huayi Brothers, which is a giant entertainment conglomerate. Huayi Brothers also has opened several film theme parks, kind of like Universal Studios in different cities around China. And they have then combined these sort of theme parks with actual film production facilities. So I think if we go to the next, they have a short video, they reconstructed another Shanghai set for this film, The 800. So I just wanted to show that scene gives you a sense of the scale. This is like several city blocks that have been constructed. This is all just a film set to recreate Shanghai in 1930s. If you've seen the film, it's about a famous episode in the defense of Shanghai during the Japanese invasion in 1937. And this set is adjacent to the Huayi Brothers Movie World theme park in Suzhou. The set is not open to the public, but I was able to get in and take some photographs. So this is what the set looks, a section of the set along this is supposed to be the river there. On the other side of the river is the warehouse. And this is a casino that appears in the film. So the film's release, the release of 800 was actually delayed for over a year due to issues with the censors, but did eventually get released. The finished film really can't be more different than the early films of the fifth generation directors that we saw earlier. I mean, this is enormous sets, heavy use of digital effects, lots of action, fast, complex camera movements. So it really is kind of a Hollywood-style production. Which again is the direction things were moving to compete with Hollywood. So the Beijing Film Studio, this is an earlier studio created in 1949 as one of the primary state-run film productions actually in the city of Beijing. It was the first studio to open up to international co-productions. Bernardo Bertolucci's The Last Emperor was made there in 1987. They also filmed in the actual Forbidden City before Hengdian was built. And, but the interior scenes were filmed at the Beijing Film Studio. And it was about that time that Feng Su, who I mentioned, the Taiwanese actress turned producer, after retiring from acting, she had been in A Touch of Zen, Dragon Gate Inn, and other sort of well-known films. And she began producing films through Thompson, the company Thompson Films. She bought the rights to the Lillian Lee novel, Farewell My Concubine, and she approached Chen Kaige to direct it. So initially he was actually not very inspired by the novel, but he eventually agreed with some changes. They added a section about the Cultural Revolution, which was not in the original book, expanded the role of the female character that Gong Li plays, and then also had one of the male characters commit suicide in the end, which had not been in the original novel. Farewell My Concubine had an initial budget of over $4 million, far more than the average an average for a Chinese film being made at the time was around $100,000, so to have a budget of $4 million was really unheard of. And we're able to bring in name stars like Gong Li, who is now famous from Yellow Earth and Red Sorghum, and Leslie Chung, who was a Hong Kong pop idol and movie star at the time. And the film, of course, went on to win the Palme d'Or at Cannes Film Festival, so this was a tremendous achievement at the time for a Chinese-made film. So I was just going to show a segment from the film towards the end of the film, which I think is in the video next. Yes. If you remember this kind of denunciation scene towards the end of the film, and see the building with the poster of Chairman Mao in the background there. So this is that building that was in the film there. So this sort of back lot was still, a few years ago, was still sitting there kind of in disrepair in this studio lot, in an abandoned studio lot in central Beijing. The studio had since moved outside the city. The Beijing Film School still has some facilities around there, but this studio lot was basically sitting unused. It became sort of overgrown over time, and but just a couple of pictures of the condition it was in at the time. In 2002, Quentin Tarantino actually filmed some scenes from Kill Bill here at the studio. It was to be one of the last productions made there before this the studio site was abandoned. There's actually a deleted scene you can find on YouTube from the Kill Bill where you can recognize some of these same buildings. However, unfortunately, this site has now since been demolished. So I was there just back in last October. This whole site has been totally razed. It's empty, and make room for new construction. And I wanted to show this because I think first of all, I was glad to be able to document it before it was entirely gone. Here's how it looked, kind of overgrown. But it shows the vulnerability of some of these sites too. So, of course, China is changing rapidly. So is the movie world. The legendary backlots of Hollywood, where they had sections of city streets and Roman monuments, are long gone. We don't see that in LA anymore. Much more filming is done today with computer-generated imagery. And China also is expanding its digital capacity. So across the street from the China Film Group complex that I showed earlier, and its back lot is a brand new digital production facility, and more work is happening there. Last October, I was at the China Film Group complex as well, and it seemed very quiet and empty in comparison to several years ago. And so while new sets are being constructed for some big budget productions like the 800, not all of the dozens of sort of film sites around the country are likely to be economically sustainable. And provincial governments often invest in these facilities in hopes to bring in business, to bring in tourism, but not all are successful. And so in some cases, like in Hengdian, tourism may be an answer. But economists studying this model have cautioned that local investment in these endeavors is risky. So they're not all going to pan out. At the same time, the Chinese film industry, I think, is suffering some of the same challenges Hollywood is facing today, which is competition from streaming services and short-form video, which means a drop in theater attendance. And so although theater attendance has come back post-COVID, probably more so in China than here in the US, but it's still not where it was before the pandemic. And you know, there's still this issue of competing with all the content that's available through streaming services and apps. So studios often feel that they have to go even bigger now to distinguish themselves from all the streaming content. And I think the 800 is a good example of that. You know, this enormous production. So I think one of the questions is, you know, is what's really the future of these movie sets? Are they really going to continue to persist? I think, you know, I wanted to be able to document these sites as they are now. So actually just this year, interestingly, in an effort to boost box office revenue, the Chinese government launched a 2025 campaign called Film Consumption Year, which is supposed to provide discounts and incentives for people to actually go to the movie theaters and see the movies there, but also to promote travel to locations like Hengdian. But I think we have yet to see whether you know, whether all this will be sustained or not. You know, I just also wanted to note that there's a lot that's changed in the years that I've been working on this project. So over the past 10 years, a lot has changed around the world of film in China. We've actually seen a tremendous growth in domestic film production in China and some very successful blockbuster films with high production values, the Wolf Warrior films, The Wandering Earth, and other films that have really been very successful. Chinese audiences are showing increasing interest in domestic films now and not always looking to Hollywood. And Hollywood no longer you know, dominates the Chinese box office in the way it did years ago. And in fact, just this year, the animated film Ne Zha 2, released during the Spring Festival, became the highest grossing animated film of all time, the highest grossing non-English language film of all time, and brought in over $2 billion, mostly from Chinese theaters. It's now in 5th place among the highest grossing films of all time, after 2 Avatar films, the Avengers, Endgame, and Titanic. And interestingly, those top 4 films really were so successful largely due to their success in China. China also had a strong presence at the Cannes Film Festival this year, if you saw news from there. And and then at the same time, I think the relationship between Hollywood and China has certainly cooled off from where it was 10 years ago. The relationship, obviously, between U.S. and China has deteriorated in that time. The ongoing trade war will likely have an impact on film as well. President Trump has proposed imposing tariffs on foreign films. It's unclear exactly how that would work, but that's the proposal. And at the same time, Beijing has threatened to limit entry of Hollywood films into China. So these days, I think it actually seems that Hollywood really needs China more than China needs Hollywood. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this evolves in the future. Yes, so anyway, so thank you for indulging me with this tour into the world of Chinese films and movie sets, and happy to answer any questions or hear your thoughts and comments.
In addition to taking photos, do you do interviews with film crews or directors or the managers of the film studios?
Yeah, so I haven't myself. I've certainly relied a lot on other researchers who have delved into this much more deeply. I did have the chance hanging around some of the film sets when film productions were going on, just to talk with some of the extras and people hanging around the set, and really interesting to hear. Unfortunately, I don't speak Chinese, and so I am limited in what I can do there without some help from a translator. There are also a lot of Western extras who participate in these films, and they always need to, oftentimes the films need to have some Westerners in the background if you're making a film in Shanghai in the 1930s when there was a lot of international presence there. So, and oftentimes the extras are just students and you know, people who are hoping to earn a few, you know, some extra spending money, but also it's just a cool experience to participate in a film.
You have another project, you said in Spain. You do speak Spanish, right?
Yeah.
Did you do any interviews there?
Yeah, so the project in Spain was, you know, the films that were made there in sort of the big era of the spaghetti westerns and the Hollywood films being made there was back in the 60s and 70s. But what I did do was interview some of these western towns that were built for the spaghetti westerns are still there and are now open for tourists. And there are a lot of stuntmen and actors who work there, just they put on shows for the tourists and things like that. So I did interview some of those stuntmen and actors, you know, to kind of learn a little bit about their life and what it is often it's kind of seasonal work. They're there for part of the during the tourist season, and then the rest of the year they're back home in Madrid or Barcelona. But yeah, it is a lot of interesting characters who get involved in this world of kind of just the life around the film sets.
I have two questions. The first question is you mentioned that there are enormous instruction in field because a repetitive thing to be used over time. So my question is based on your observation in the past 10 years, what are the things you have noticed, like what are the things right now? And the second question is related to the movie Naja 2 because I'm a huge fan of it. But again, based on your observation, do you consider that as an exception to China's film industry, or you think that's a good start for China in the future? Thank you.
Well, I think I mentioned earlier, yeah, that there are a few sort of themes that we see appear over and over again. Shanghai, in the 1930s, there's so many TV episodes that take place then, and so there are actually, I think, at least 4 different Shanghai sets around the country. There are probably more that, but at least 4 that I visited and photographed. You know, one at the Shanghai Film Studio, the set from the 800, another sort of Shanghai set they built at Hengdian, and there are others as well. So I guess I'm not sure I know exactly what your question was around the repetition, but I guess the point I was trying to make is that we don't see that kind of phenomenon here because, or in Hollywood, because the economics are not there to make sense of it. But when you're filming so many TV episodes and movies that are set in this same sort of setting, there's an economy of scale to that. So I don't know if that answers your question, your first question or not, but
just to clarify, do you notice any trend over the 10 years? Like in general, you mentioned like anti-Japan.
yeah.
Is there any other trend that you notice?
Well, I think there are these other historical periods I mentioned. I think that what's changed over the last 10 years is we are seeing more films, Chinese films and TV series that are set in contemporary times, that are not set in historical times. So I think that is somewhat of a change, which is, I guess, is encouraging that people who are making these films and TV series are feeling the freedom to sort of set stories in contemporary times. And there have been, some more serious dramas also set in contemporary times, that have been successful. So I think, that's I think an important trend to note, and hopefully we'll see more of that in the future, so that content won't be so limited by these sort of historical categories. And then in terms of Naja 2, I mean, my sense is that this is, this is not just, an outlier. I think we'll probably see more productions like the, high production value films that are being made in China, because certainly the capacity and the resources are there are there to do it.
So could you kind of give us your professional background and maybe how that affected your approach to the project and your takeaways? And I guess I have a part 2 to this question is, what are some points that you would like us to get away from or get out of your presentation and your works?
So I'm actually trained as a researcher, so I work. I also have a day job working in public health research, which is part of what brought me to China in the first place, as an epidemiologist, but also have training in historical research. So I would say that research background really, to me, has been critical in this documentary work, because in some ways it's, epidemiologist is, or historian is often trying to piece together a story from a number of sources, and so I've tried to, use some of the similar methods in terms of researching the history, background of these film sets. So it's not just going there and taking photographs, but really trying to understand some of the story behind it. So yeah, I think in that sense, my sort of professional background has been helpful there. In terms of the key messages, I think there are a couple. One is I think to me what was most fascinating as an American, and certainly I don't consider myself a China expert or a China scholar, but I have learned a lot through this project, and so to me it was just fascinating to learn about this whole world of film content that I really knew nothing about before. My hope is that this will be of interest to other people as well who want to learn about more about that world of film. But I think also it's to me it's been a fascinating story just in how the movie industry in China has changed over time, and also has some parallels to to trends we're seeing in Hollywood as well. So to me that was another fascinating part of this story.
The colors of your photographs are very rich and saturated. Are the Chinese films like that too?
Sometimes, yes. Not all of them, but yes, I think particularly the big budget films tend to use these very saturated colors, intense colors, and to me that was, as opposed to the earlier films, which may have been a little more muted. I think Yellow Earth, for example, which I showed, had much more muted tones. So yeah, to me it does reflect sort of the where the films have been going over time.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark, for coming here tonight, and thank you, everyone, for joining us here.